Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to conclude our conversation with Clair Barrus, one of the authors of Secret Covenants, New Insights into Mormon Polygamy. We're going to talk a little bit about Joseph Smith and the laws, William and Jane Law, and some of the allegations back and forth between them about polygamy. So you won't want to miss this conversation. We'll also talk about some of the polygamy skeptics have decided that the Clayton Journals aren't reliable. I'm going to ask Clair about this and see what he says. So you won't want to miss this conversation.
Okay, the laws, William and Emma. Okay, yeah.
Oh, that's a great story.
So, yeah, there's two stories. There's the story of Joseph Smith and Jane Law, and the story of William Law and Emma Smith.
Right.
And
the second story is the one I remember more, but the first story is part of it too. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's first talk about William Law and Emma Smith. So in D&C 132, there's a very curious thing in verse 51, and then again in 54. And in 51, it says something to the effect that Emma, that which I commanded you to partake of, you should not partake of that.
I rescind
this, and then it says something in 54. It says this is really an Abraham. It's a test. It's an Abrahamic sacrifice, and that's really what it was. But don't partake.
Don't do what I said.
Right. Well, what is she?
What's she referring to?
What was she supposed to partake of? Well, a few weeks earlier, we have basically. It looks like it's probably William Law, but it might be William Clayton. So William Clayton's journal has a lot of interesting information, and in there, we learned that Joseph and Emma are close to divorce. That this plural marriage stuff is that Emma's exasperated with it. She apparently, and at one point, Joseph asks William Clayton, "Are you being familiar with Emma?" And he says, "No, I'm not." So Joseph is suspicious that Emma is not being, fooling around a little bit.
Like he's not being faithful.
Right. And so you have these things going on. Well, there's evidence that it's William Law that Emma wants, and William Law writes later in life about this. Well, Joseph Jackson writes about it in Nauvoo in 1844, and he says...
Well, and he's a little bit of a suspicious character too, isn't he?
Yeah. We can't take everything he says at face value. But he says that Emma was upset, and so Joseph said, "Look, you can have your own spiritual husband. If I can have my spiritual wives and you leave me alone, then you can have a spiritual husband." And she says, "I like that little man," I think she calls him a little man, William Law, that she's attracted to him. And so she's said, "Okay, you can have William Law."
So if you get many wives, I get another husband.
Yes. And this and then William Law and Joseph Jackson calls it like a wife swap, because and we'll talk about this in a minute, but there's a thing going on between Joseph and Jane Law. We'll get to that. But Joseph Jackson calls it like a wife swap. And William Law writes about this much later, decades later, and he said it wasn't a wife swap. It was literally Joseph being compensated for or Emma being compensated for her difficulties with Joseph having these young women living in the house, and so forth and so on. So that's kind of how William Law puts it up. William Law's journal also alludes to this. There's crossed out aspects of William Law's journal. William Law's journal that we have is we need to be cautious about using it, but it does seem to back this story up. But we don't have the holograph of it. We just have a typescript that was provided not too long ago, and so we can't know for sure. We don't know how trustworthy that is, but it fits in with the entire story quite well.
It fits in.
Yep. So sounds like
a journal. I'm trying to remember. I know Ben Park used something, and there was a little bit of a ruckus about, since it was a typescript and it was only a half page, whether it was really part of a journal.
Yeah. So I can't recall the historian's name, but quite a few years ago, a historian got a transcript from the 1844, several months of 1844.
Was it Andrew Ehad? It might have been him.
No, it wasn't Ehad.
It was
someone else. It starts in January and it goes for several months. And it's a fascinating journal entry. But there's this historian who provided it cannot give any background. I think it seems to be that he was sworn to secrecy. You can't say where you got it, blah, blah, blah. Oh. But here it is. He publishes it.
You didn't get it from Mark Hoffman.
BYU Studies. It may even predate Hoffman.
Okay.
But I don't know. I'm not sure, Rick. That's a good question. But anyway, it's very curious, and it fits in. It doesn't contradict any of the storyline, and it seems to fit in well. If it's a forgery, it was written by someone who really was very familiar with all the goings on in Nauvoo at the time. So anyway, Emma is told, don't partake of that which you were offered.
Don't partake of William Law.
Don't partake of William Law. And some people, and I think it might also be William Clayton. That's a slight possibility, but William Law is specifically mentioned. So I think that's probably the case. So then we have Joseph Smith and Jane Law. So the Laws wanted to be sealed. They really wanted to be sealed. Remember, William Law's in the first presidency. They really wanted that blessing of being eternally sealed. Joseph seems to want to require that they accept, at a minimum, in principle, polygamy, if not actually engaging in polygamy before they are allowed to be sealed, as the historical record and as people have written about it. So there's Alexander Nybar writes in his journal in 1844. He says, Joseph Smith came over, told me about the first vision, and he tells the story of the first vision. And then he says, and then Joseph told me about Jane Law. And Joseph, summarizing basically the Jane Law, and Joseph's walking by, and he goes over and stops to see Jane Law. William Law is not at home. And Jane Law says, I want to be sealed. And Joseph says something and Joseph tells Nybar, didn't have the heart to tell her that her husband is an adulterer. And there's a whole story on accusations of adultery between William Law and Joseph Smith. They're both accusing each other of adultery.
You call me an adulterer, I'll call you an adulterer.
Yeah, and we could get into that, but it's kind of a long, there's a lot there. And I try to give a little timeline of these adultery things in this chapter. But Joseph on the sidebar says, I didn't have the heart to tell her that her husband was an adulterer. And so he said, but I can't marry you. And then she puts her arms around him. So they're in an embrace. And then she says, well, if I can't be sealed to my husband, can I be sealed to you? And Joseph says to Nibart, I gently pushed her away and offered her a denial and went on my way. Then the journal account continues saying that William came home and
it seems like a strange thing because he's not that good of friends with Alexander Nibart, is he? That he would just spill this accusation.
I don't know, and it stands out a little strangely, and I don't understand it. I can't give any commentary as to why he shows up, tells the first vision story, followed by this polygamy proposal story. It's curious, but there it is. It's there.
Yeah.
So William comes home and he says, "Who was here?" And she said, "Joseph." And what did he want? And then she says, "Well, Joseph proposed to me. He wanted to marry me." So,
so it doesn't really match what Nibart said.
No, this is what This is part of Nibar's account.
Oh, this is still part of Nibar's.
Yes.
Story. Okay.
So in Jane's story, in Joseph's story accounting,
he pushed her away.
First of all, it's Jane proposing to Joseph, but then Jane changes the story according to Joseph, saying it was actually Joseph proposing to me, and so that's
definite. He said, she said.
Well, right, and then there's another very cryptic entry in some High Council court minutes, and some guy named Jacob, I'm not going to remember his name, testifies, and it's very cryptic, and somebody else has tried to piece together what's being said, but it seems to be talking about that there's Jane and Joseph, and that they may have been in the bedroom together, and I don't, and it's hard to say, but that can be easily dismissed, but it's worth people who are interested in diving into it. It's worth looking at it, and I do include that in here so that people can look at it and try to make sense of what's going on. Regardless, there seems to be. Oh, and then William Law writes in his journal that we've already talked about, that journal, saying that Joseph Smith proposed to my wife today. Just throws that out there, and that's about the time it's not long he writes, gets the Nauvoo Expositor going. He's had enough, and he's like, I'm going to expose all this stuff, and so that's another revelation. Is that the revelation has to do with that Joseph has a revelation that William Law is an adulterer, and so that's why I include it in here. And if you read D&C 132, there's a lot of text about Joseph's ability to discern adulterers, and he talks a lot about adultery, and it fits in with the William Law story. And William Law is accusing Joseph of having living in an open state of adultery with Sarah Lawrence, and Joseph is accusing William Law of being an adulterer, but he doesn't specify who with. But I think he's saying that he's had a revelation that he is an adulterer. So that's kind of the story there.
Huh. All right. So where do we go next?
The last revelation that I have is recorded by William Clayton in his journal, and William Clayton has his eye on a woman, Lydia Moon. He's already married two of the Moon sisters, and he wants to marry a third. He asks Joseph Smith, and then Joseph says, well, I've had, I think he calls it an item of law revealed to him, which is that if a man has more than two sisters in his family, that it's likely to cause wrangles. That's the word he used, wrangles.
Now, wait a minute, because we've got Theodore Turley who married three sisters. So when did this happen?
Well, it's let's take a look.
Because to be honest, I guess according to Marianne, there were 3 sisters. 2 of them were sealed in 1844, April, right before Joseph died. And then the 3rd one was sealed in 1846, if I remember right.
Well, and I think this is a private revelation to Clayton, and it's either on or before September 15th, 1843.
Okay.
So Clayton says, okay, all right, that's fair. That's good. And then Joseph says, well, do you mind asking her, would you be okay if I married her instead? And William's like, no, that's fine. And he says, could you ask her for me? So William Clayton brings it up with her, and she politely says, thanks, but no thanks. And then William passes that on to Joseph Smith. And that was the end of that.
That was the end of that.
Yeah.
But it was supposedly a revelation.
Yeah, he says, I've had an item of law revealed on this subject.
Okay.
Yep. So it was a revelation.
We don't really have much more of the text than that, though, huh?
No, I mean, I can read it to you exactly if you want, but it's a very brief, very brief. So let's see. Joseph told me he had lately had a new item of law revealed to him in relation to myself. So it's in relation to William Clayton. He said the Lord had revealed to him that a man could only take 2 of a family except by express revelation. And I had said I intended to take Lydia. He made this known for my benefit. To have more than 2 in a family was apt to cause wrangles and trouble. So it sounds like there's
only 2, unless I have a revelation that it's okay to have more than that.
Express revelation, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So that might explain.
Like Richard Turley, or not
the
Richard.
Turleys left.
Theodore Turley.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, be careful. If Richard's watching, he's going to go, wait a minute, Rick. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting because according to Marianne, Sarah and Mary, no, not Mary, Sarah and Mary, I can't remember. But anyway, 2 of the sisters got married and then got married, but maybe not sealed, and then they got sealed later. But anyway, they ended up, he had 3, but he only lived with 2, and Eliza was kind of like, well, she didn't live with Theodore, so it was kind of a weird marriage, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But she was taken care of spiritually in the next life, I guess, is the idea. So I do want to ask you one more question, because I know that there has been an allegation that the William Clayton Journal cannot be trusted. Apparently there were more than one journal, and I don't have the dates right, but like July 1st was in book 1, and July 3rd was in book 2, and July 8th was in book 1, and July 10th was in book 2. So he wasn't consistently writing in the same book all the time. And so there are some who say, 1, it's not contemporary evidence. A second allegation is William Clayton, because the Clayton Journals are where we get the majority of our contemporary evidence. So, of course, polygamy skeptics are going to want to throw the whole thing out because it hurts their narrative. But I was wondering if you had an opinion on the William Clayton Journals.
Well, yeah, and I haven't looked at that argument. I have talked with some of the people who are working on the Clayton Diaries, and I asked them specifically, do you see anything in there that makes you suspect that this was being rewritten later? And they said no. At least the person I talked to said.
I mean, rewritten, you'd write them in order, right?
Yeah, and and again, I don't know if that holds any water or not. They did say that the paper it's written on was contemporary to the time. Apparently, they've done some kind of analysis on the paper, and it fits the time frame. Beyond that, I don't know. The polygamy denial. They want to reject evidence that argues that Joseph Smith did practice polygamy, and so the Clayton Diaries have to be dismissed. There's no doubt about it. The curious thing is, if Clayton did rewrite a section or some of his journals to insert plural marriage, he makes. If you think that you would, if you're going to rewrite part of your own journals and insert some stuff, you'd want to go a little bit hagiographic, make you and some of your heroes look good. Nobody looks. I mean, William Clayton didn't do that. If he's rewriting stuff, he puts all sorts of, like this last thing. If you wanted, he'd want Joseph Smith. I don't know why would you make Joseph look so bad? Because Brigham liked Joseph looking good, and why would you insert a thing that Joseph ends up taking the wife that you wanted to have? That's not a, and Brigham doesn't look good in there.
Theodore Turley, there's a big dispute with him that Theodore Turley was mismanaging money, and so
it's an interesting, and I guess you could argue he rewrote it, but you have to ask, well, why would he portray these things so bizarrely? It's just everything's just weird and strange, and it just doesn't seem to fit with, like, if you're going to rewrite and make fiction out of it, that you would try to make some people look a little bit better,
right, than
they do look. At least that's what. So I think that's a bit of a problem with that argument, and on a more broad nature, I in this, as I researched this chapter, I came across, there's a lot of things that I've came across that I don't hear that haven't been addressed by the polygamy denial people. There's some documents that I talk about and I don't see, and they're all contemporary. I don't see.
They'll watch this interview. They'll get you.
Yeah, I'm sure they will, and I maybe I'll go, oh boy, I got to deal with some other stuff. And I think it's, and this whole idea of dismissing stuff, you have to dismiss the Clayton Journals, you have to dismiss the Nauvoo Expositor. Yeah. Somehow you've got to really twist that. And I haven't, like I said, I'm not familiar with the arguments of how they do that. You have to dismiss all of the articles in the Sangamo Journal.
William Law, I'll just show you what they do. William Law was an anti-Mormon, or, anti-polygamist at least. And so therefore he can't be trusted.
Well, he's anti-polygamy, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because,
he's an enemy
it appears
of Joseph Smith, though.
There's contemporary evidence that he and Jane were, both being approached by either Emma or Joseph. And I don't know. I don't think you can just dismiss it to say, well, they're enemies. You have to deal with the evidence. And there's contemporary evidence that backs that this stuff was going on. You have to have really good evidence to dismiss the Nauvoo Expositor. And that's a hard thing to dismiss, I think.
Since you mentioned that, there's another podcast called Church History Matters, which I have been pleasantly surprised how good they do on a lot of stuff. They do a total hatchet job. William Law, Wilson Law, all the publishers of the Expositor, and just it's a character assassination on all those people. To dismiss, they've got different reasons to dismiss the Expositor. It's just Joseph called it a tissue of lies, it is. They do use very flowery language. There's some over the top stuff, but I don't agree with Church History Matters and how they just character assassinate everybody associated with the.
It's not a scholarly approach,
right?
everybody was character assassinating the other side.
Right.
Joseph was doing it, and the laws were doing it, and I mean,
Yeah.
it just goes on and on and on, and you can't use that as an argument to dismiss or accept.
Yeah. And I know Michael Quinn said, I mean, clearly in the one issue that was published, there are allegations of polygamy in there, but Quinn says that wasn't what bothered Joseph the most, because the issue 2, which was going to come out, was going to be talking about Joseph's treason against the United States for doing negotiations with Texas, which was a different country, Russia, and what was the other one? Was it France or England or something like that?
Right.
And so that's what, that all deals with the Council of 50 Minutes that Joseph asked to be burned. And that's what Joseph was more concerned about. The polygamy allegations were just like, who cares? Like, I mean, Joseph was dealing with it, but that wasn't what Joseph was concerned about.
Right. I mean, they were exposed. They were exposing all of the big stuff, including polygamy and the Council of 50 stuff. And who knows how many issues they would have had if they could have kept going.
They only got one issue out.
Right. Well, and Rick, I don't think you can just simply dismiss the women who have published in these papers, whether they had the help of John C. Bennett or not. You can't just throw them away, I don't think, because none of them produced a counter narrative saying, John C. Bennett made this up about me and published it. You got to have some evidence that, and with that many testimonials being published in these papers, no woman came forth and said, actually, that's not true about me. And I think that's pretty big. You can make a claim, but then you got to have some evidence to back it. And I think and just saying that, well, John C. Bennett might have helped, that doesn't mean that they weren't valid. So I think that's a problem too.
Okay.
Same with all the women who testified later in Utah.
Temple Lot case.
Not just the Temple Lot case. You have probably 100 people or more that said, I was involved in plural marriage with Joseph Smith, and these are sprinkled out over decades. These testimonials or statements, or even speaking at BYU and giving talks about that. You can't just dismiss all that unless you can somehow show that Brigham had ordered all these people. You got to show the order or the meeting minutes where this is. You got to show something. You can't just say, we just dismiss them.
We don't like it. We don't like their testimony, so we dismiss it.
Even if there's a handful of testimonies in the Temple Lot case that all sound contrived, I haven't looked at that. That doesn't dismiss all of the others. There were a lot of others. You can't just say they don't count, And it's important to remember, and this is in this book, but these people were placed under a covenant with the penalty of death if they ever revealed that they were involved in polygamy. I mean, it was a very serious covenant, and they held true to that covenant until some point in the Nauvoo era. They felt, I think, they had permission to start talking openly about it. So I think that explains the secrecy.
Yeah,
or that there absolutely was a covenant of secrecy, just like there was in the temple endowment, in the Masonic ceremonies, in the Council of 50, and in the Danites, and with the polygamists. We have, I think, 5 different organizations that had secrecy with penalties attached, and we have to remember that. That's an important factor.
Okay, and that's why we don't have as much contemporary evidence as we would like to have, just because people couldn't talk about it.
But there definitely is contemporary. Everything I have in here is based on 1844 or earlier documentation.
Right.
I supplement with later stuff, but I establish everything with documentation that is during Joseph Smith's lifetime.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice if there's more, but there is more. There's quite a bit. It'd be nice to have more, but it was such a secretive thing that it's no surprise that we don't have as much as we'd like to have.
Can I ask you one other question? Because I still haven't. I've read Don Bradley's chapter on Fanny Alger, but apparently he wrote another chapter which I haven't read with Christopher Smith about Fanny Alger being an adoptive sealing. Before, have you read that chapter?
I have not read that.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, so I can't ask your opinion on it.
No.
Darn. Okay. Well, there's lots to read, I got to tell you guys, and I'm excited. We're going to give away an autographed copy here. Go to gospeltangents.com/contest, and you could win an autographed copy. So, Clair Barrus, is there anything else we need to add before I let you go?
No, I appreciate your time, Rick, and it's been a fun project to work on. I hope a few people pick up the book and read it.
I've been getting a lot of entries, I have to tell you.
Good.
People are very interested in this book.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Well, and thank you. I guess we'll let the cat out of the bag. I interviewed Clair about a month ago, and there was no sound. I was so upset. So thank you, Clair, for doing this again. And because we've spent double time on this.
Yes, we have, but it's been enjoyable. I like talking about it.
So, all right. Well, thanks again. Appreciate you being on Gospel Tangents.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Clair Barrus, one of the authors of Secret Covenants, New Insights into Mormon Polygamy. In our next conversation, we're going to take a tour of Kirtland. We're going on a road trip. But yeah, Newell K. Whitney was the first bishop of Kirtland. They have a film about him, and he's like, I don't know if I can be the bishop. And Joseph Smith reportedly said, well, take that up with the Lord. Thanks for listening, and I hope you continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.